Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the first episode of a new series, The Bird's Eye View with the Mirror's Simon Bird. Thank you to everyone who got in touch to suggest a title. This is the one that we've settled on. Every Wednesday, myself and Simon will be here on the podcast and on YouTube talking about Newcastle United. This first episode, we'll have Simon answering your questions, many which have been sent in via email at the EIBWpodcast@reachplc.com. Do get in touch. We've got questions on Eddie Howe's future, the transfer window gone, the one to come, plus much more. Let's get on with it. Simon, welcome back. How are we keeping?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, buoyed by the start to the season, despite the performances. It's all been good.
Yeah, we've got plenty of questions to come on that. Before we get into the questions, just talk to our viewers and our listeners about what it's been like to cover Newcastle United for so long, and I guess what a privilege it is to do so, or perhaps not.
Yeah. Well, no, it is a massive privilege. You've got to. I mean, there are down times, and there were lots of down times in the Mike Ashley era when things weren't going so well, and your colleagues are covering teams winning trophies and traveling around Europe and all that kind of stuff. But it is a massive privilege. Done it for 24 years now. I started when Sir Bobby Robson was in charge and he was bouncing around about 13th place. My first summer was when they signed Craig Bellamy and Lauren Robert. And then Shearer got fit again from his knee injury. And that's when it kind of all exploded into life under Bobby. So it was a great first 18 months, 2 years, watching them finish 4th and 3rd and 5th. Really memorable years with some great personalities at the club, and then it kind of dipped for a while. But this last 2-3 years, when the team's been winning, there's a manager you trust in charge, bit of investment. It's been great.
I guess it must never get boring because actually, if you look around the pool of journalists who you work with match by match, a lot of them have done this for many, many years. A lot of them started here actually at the Chronicle and on the Journal, Sunday Sun, but have stayed covering the club for so many years. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, there's George at The Athletic and Martin Hardy from the Times that all started upstairs in the Sunday Sun. I was on news at the Journal before I went to London for a bit. And I mean, I think it happens because when you have, often the national newspaper reporters are often accused of being, London-based, whatever. But actually, what you've got in Newcastle and other regions is people who are actually from here, working for national newspapers or local newspapers, who were brought up here, and it is a job they're really passionate about, and it's a job they care about. I mean, I don't think I would want to cover another region or club because I'm from here and I know what it means to people and I know the history of the club, and it's one of those things that you've grown up with and you want to be part of, whether that's as a fan or really luckily and fortunately and privileged with huge privilege to be a journalist, asking people questions, writing about it for a living, going to the matches, seeing training camps behind the scenes. It's an absolute privilege to do the job, and you never kind of lose sight of that, even on a sort of midweek when Champions League is happening without Newcastle. It's a great job to do and a great club to cover as well. It's like you said, it's always been newsy. I mean, we've had the ups and downs, and we've had fights on the pitch between Kieran Dyer, one of the most shocking things I ever saw, to managerial changes. The one thing that's been missing in those 24 years is actually watching a trophy, and it's the same for all the fans. We haven't seen a trophy happen. The only one I've covered for the North East is Middlesbrough winning the Carling Cup under Steve McLaren in 2004. So one trophy in 24 years is a pretty abysmal record for a journalist, especially if you're in Manchester. You probably cover them 2 or 3 trophies every year. But a great job to have. Yeah,
it's your fault perhaps that they haven't won anything. I mean, that John Gibson can actually lay a greater claim to that because he started 1966, saw the Fairs Cup getting lifted, and thought he was onto a winner. And they haven't lifted anything since. We spoke a few weeks ago about you becoming a weekly contributor to the show, and here we are. Are you excited to get started?
I am. I think it's a great outlet. I mean, obviously we write a lot and people read the stuff we do, and I write about Sunderland and Middlesbrough as well at times. But to actually have an outlet like this to do a podcast with you and field questions from fans is a really good thing, because there's a lot of stuff we pick up that I don't know, maybe fans don't get the right idea about how we're covering the club. We're asking tough questions like that, like you've sent in today, of the club and of Eddie Howe. We're writing about it all the time, but it's quite a nice forum in terms of a podcast to discuss like the colourful things you've seen or really where you're coming from on certain issues. And it's also really accessible for fans to listen to when they're walking the dog or going to work or something. So it's a really enjoyable thing to do. Yeah,
Or preparing for the Great North Run, which I'm sure many of you guys are getting ready for this Sunday. Well, we're getting to the first question, and this one is coming from Tommy in Ashton. He says, "Hi both, great to see Simon added to the bill. My question for him is the start to the season sustainable? How confident are you that the poor performances will turn into good ones?" Now, of course, Newcastle United, unbeaten in their opening 3 games of the Premier League season as well, is in the Cup. But it's not been easy on the ice. Simon, improvement needed. Is there an improvement coming?
I think improvement in performance is needed, and I think Eddie Howe admitted after the match, which is quite a strong quote actually, that fitness needs to improve as well. They haven't looked as fit and as relentless as they have been in past years at the start of the season. So a bit undercooked, probably from tiredness, from players being away at the Euros and the tours they've done in since May, Australia and Japan and all over the place. So yeah, improvement is needed. I think playing like that. Is it sustainable? It's a really good question. I mean, it's been sustainable for 4 matches and they've scraped through. And I think that's because Newcastle are so powerful on the counter attack. I think one of the first things Eddie Howe made them be was great at hitting teams on the break who are really trying to attack them. So it possibly is sustainable for a while, but I think he'll want to evolve the performances and evolve the team into one that's kind of more on the front foot and more forceful and more has more of the ball basically. I think it's not sustainable in terms of you can't concede 20 shots a game like they did against Spurs and 49 touches in their own box without conceding more goals. So I think they definitely need to improve.
I think that's where the sustainable question comes in, because I've seen some really positive takes from that Spurs game. Obviously, Newcastle United won, which was the best take to take away from it. But the fact that they conceded so many shots on goal, people say, no, it was all part of the plan. It was all part of the plan. But going forward, you can't do that every single game, because not only are you going to concede a goal, you're going to concede a few goals.
Yeah, but I think you need to go back to pre-season when Eddie Howe saw us in Germany and we said, what are the priorities early on this season? And his number one priority was looking at the stats from last year. They were far too leaky. They conceded far too many goals. There was nothing wrong with the attack. They scored, was it a record number of goals in the Premier League campaign. But the problem was the defence, and they wanted to shore it up. And now since then, they've obviously lost Shah through suspension. They still haven't got Botman and Lascelles back, and they've had a makeshift defence which is needed protecting. So I think part of the tactic is that Newcastle have had to protect their defence by being slightly more negative, and when they haven't got the ball, they've gone 4-5-1 or even 4-6-0, whatever way you want to look at it. So I think he's kind of achieved the first thing he wanted to do. They've been pretty solid and pretty hard to break down, but that's come at a cost of surrendering possession for too much. But there's one important point to make, is that everyone was moaning, Eddie Howe's only got one way of playing. They can only go flat out. They can only go 100% of teams, and that's knackering the players and wearing them out and causing injuries. Now, if Newcastle have developed this, if this is a strategy, and they've developed a new strategy to soak it up a bit, be not in control of the ball, but in control of a game and getting blocks in and then smashing teams on the break with Isaac, Murphy, whoever, Gordon and Barnes, then that's another way of playing. And it's it might be an evolution that they do this against really good teams without leaving themselves exposed. So it is. I think it's a worry, but it could be another way of playing. It's not for whole games, but maybe when they've got a lead and they just need to step off the gas a little bit. So you could see it as a positive as well.
I think it is a positive, the fact that they are unbeaten going to the international break on the back of a win against a side who will rival them for European football for next season. It makes Eddie Howe's job maybe slightly easier in terms of getting better performances out of them, because he's not worrying about being bottom of the league. They're 4th in the league, so it's a good foundation to build on.
Yeah, it's massive. Well, I mean, you need results early in the season, and it relieves the pressure. And there's now no pressure on Eddie Howe,
because we felt that there probably was pressure on Eddie Howe coming into this season, given how last season ended.
Well, I mean, because the club rightly put the pressure on themselves, because Darren Eales said right at the start in July that we want to be challenging for the top 6. Europe is the aim. And a series of players have come out since then and said that the aim is to get back into Europe, which it should be. I mean, and 2 years ago, they were scared. They weren't scared. I mean, maybe they were reluctant to say that. They were reluctant to burden themselves with a kind of an expectation of getting into the top 6. But now they realise where the club's moving to. and that's what people want. Having had the one season taste of it last year, they want to be in the top 6, 7. So yeah, it is. There would have been pressure, but the pressure's kind of, it's a big sigh that they've got 7 points now out of 9, and they're through in the cup. And that was a huge week for them last week. They delivered on the pitch twice. They got through the Carabao Cup. They beat Spurs, massive rival for the top 5. But they didn't obviously deliver on the transfer stuff, which we'll probably talk about.
Yes, as you might expect, quite a few questions have been sent in about the transfer window. And the first one we'll go to is from Paul, who's got in touch and says, with the transfer window going far from planned, do you think there's an increased risk Eddie Howe could be tempted by the England job?
Yeah, that's kind of an issue which probably only Eddie Howe knows the answer to, but we can all theorize and look at where the lie of the land and what he's been given, what he hasn't been given, and we can make a judgment. I think the FA probably don't need a New England manager until March, where they'll probably have World Cup qualifiers, which they'll need a permanent manager in for, probably not Lee Carsley, no matter how well he does. So I think there's like a few months grace, maybe 3 or 4 months now, where I think Eddie Howe is totally focused on Newcastle. We asked him on Friday whether he would walk out like Keegan did on transfer deadline day when he didn't get and he said and Eddie Howe said he couldn't predict the future at all, because you can't predict anything in future. Like, anything can happen, and that's a man speaking of experience, that anything could happen. But he did say, I want a long stay here. I want to be successful here. So I think you don't have to question Eddie Howe's commitment to the job and his focus on Newcastle. But I think behind the scenes, the FA will have been given encouragement by the fact that he didn't get what he wanted in the transfer window. And if we see the next few months unfolding, and January not unfolding the transfer window as Eddie Howe, he's not getting what he wants, he's not getting the chance to really kick the club on, then he may be tempted by the England job. Now, the theory is that it's come too early for him, he's too young for it. But you might not have the reputation that Eddie Howe's got now to get it in 10 years' time. You just don't know what's going to happen in football. It's not a smooth path for a manager. Could he turn it down? I'm not sure. He could. I think if he'd got a load of new signings this year and he was hammering Newcastle into 3rd, 4th place, and that was established, and they were going to be part of the elite 100%, I think he would stay at Newcastle and see that project through and win something. I think if it starts to tail off a bit here, then the England job might become more tempting for him. Is that diplomatic enough?
It is one to watch. We will talk more about transfers later on in the show. Just want to keep it a little bit fresh. Ryan on X has asked, the club keep mentioning we need to increase our income, yet we still don't have certain sponsors like training kit or the training ground. I understand they may wait for the outcome of Man City's arbitration for value, but the lack of big revenue is hurting us. What can we do in between? So at the time of recording, people have probably seen they've just announced a deal with Red Bull, which will add a little bit of money to the pot. But the big question about income is always about the training kit and the training ground. Where is the sponsor? What's your answer?
It's such a high profile thing, training kit and training ground to sponsor. I mean, if you're as a club, you want to maximize that revenue. Presumably, I mean, they know that we're not the business experts here. They've got appointed, highly paid people to do that kind of stuff. So there must be stuff in the pipeline that it's getting negotiated now. The question I have for the Saudi ownership and what I've written several times in the past few months and probably last couple of years, is that we saw Man City, when Man City were taking over, they pumped money in through their own companies and now that's controversial and they might have broken some rules on the way, but there must be some way within the rules of Newcastle getting fair value, big sponsorship deals from the PIF's own companies. So Saudi Airlines, Aramco, the richest company in the world, the oil spot. I think they could have soon diverted money from their own businesses into Newcastle United sooner, and I think that's a point that needs answering by chief execs, people who are in charge of the sponsorship deals, and PIF to say, why haven't you done that? Because that was a quick way of doing it, and I don't know whether the whole football club thing is a big investment for them or a source of national pride. or whether it's just a small investment in their portfolio, in the sporting portfolio, that they're not really going to do that. So I think there are questions that need to be asking. I think the PIF should be putting more money into their own companies if they wanted to really drive Newcastle on quickly as a way around PSR rules.
But I guess the controversy that would bring might be their answers. Like, we already have enough eyes on us. If we do that, we're going to get even more scrutiny, and it's maybe not. It's not a headache that we want to have.
No, well, Chelsea are getting scrutiny for the various ways they're getting around their huge spending spree now. So Chelsea are doing it. So why aren't Newcastle being belligerent and saying these are fair value? I think the time to do it actually was last summer, where you could inflate the value by Newcastle being in the Champions League and saying we're now a Champions League club, and they could have come straight in then with newer PIF sponsorship deals and justified the value that they put on them. So
who would have thought that Mike Ashley's plans for a hotel might have actually been the answer to the Public Investment Fund getting more money into the club? If only that had gone through. But it is interesting, and I mean, do you think maybe it's a learning curve? I know they've appointed people who've got a really good reputation in what they do, but when you put the whole package together, do you think it's a bit of a learning curve for everyone involved?
It probably is, because rules have changed in the last couple of years, and everyone's working out how to exploit the rules to the max, or get around the rules to the max, if we can say it like that. Like, I think some clubs are certainly somehow getting around the rules, or using their sort of devious tactics. So yeah, I do think it's a learning curve, but they've got to learn quick, because like, if you dip in one season, then you're off the radar. It's a problem.
I guess with a training kit sponsor or a training ground sponsor, it's going to be a big deal. So they want to get it right. You don't want to strike a deal maybe like they did with Castor, the previous one I did with Castor, where it was undervalued and Newcastle maybe didn't get what they should have done for that sponsor. So if they're taking a little bit of time to get it right, I think people will applaud that. And as long as they are then seen to be getting the best value possible, people will be well on board with that, and they'd want that delay rather than having something right now or 6 months ago, where in a year's time, you're still saying you still got 4 years to go, but the money you're getting is very undervalued for where you are as a club and a team.
Yeah, and well, you'd hope any deal they did had like bonuses in, or like a structure whereby if Newcastle suddenly become a top 4 club, they're paying a lot more, and you're not striking it on them being a 7th place club not in Europe. So there will be bonuses, I would have thought. I mean, Red Bull's a big company, isn't it? They sponsor some serious sporting outfits and have them there. And once you've got relationships with these massive companies like Red Bull, then I suppose that the whole deal could be expanded and become bigger and become a shirt sponsor or a stadium sponsor or whatever. But yeah, like stadium sponsorship's another one. Other clubs have done it on their rebuilds, and if it's a source of income of like 20 million or 30 million, whatever it is per year, that's huge. So, and that brings in the old Mike Ashley controversy as well, where he wanted to rename, or he did rename St James's Park and showcase it as the Sports Direct Arena. And would fans be happy with that going ahead to not have St James's Park?
I think that's the key question, though, is that when Mike Ashley did, he just did it. We woke up and one day it was kind of just done. Whereas this time around, you would like to think, and from what we've seen in the last year or so, they would communicate. I think Daniels has gone on record to say something along those lines, that any changes we made to the name or to the ground, fans would be consulted, because it does mean a lot to the fans. But again, if it is bringing in, I would like to think it would bring in a lot more than 20 million. It would be worth it. But I think that communication would be absolutely key, because fans would want to be consulted on whichever company would have their name above the door.
Yeah, when you do, if the fans would need to be given a voice and to be consulted. But I also think in consultations, like people in power doing consultations usually have an idea of what the outcome they want, and the outcome usually happens anyway. But it does. I mean, fans have to be listened to, and there has to be an open debate, and everyone has to have their say, and all aspects explored and the benefits of each.
Well, sticking with the stadium, Tom has emailed in and asks, what is the delay with the feasibility study? We keep getting told it is close, but yet we wait.
Yeah, well, we've been told lots of times that it's imminent. I think this is one of the biggest decisions that the club have got to make in the next 2 years. It sets the tone for the next 30 or 40 years. If Newcastle have a 50,000 seater stadium currently, what is the maximum they could sell out? What's the maximum revenue they could bring in from from a revamped St James's Park or from a complete new rebuild nearby or elsewhere in the city? Where would you put it in the city? It's the biggest strategic decision that they've got to make, because from having a 50,000 seater to a 65,000 with new boxes and new revenues from boxes and new bars and new function rooms, etc., to having can you sell in it 70 or 80,000? Can you go that big? And all the extra revenue, the millions a year that brings cumulatively over 20, 30, 40 years. It's a huge decision that they've got on their plates right now. Personally, I've always kind of gone for the rebuild option, as long as it's in the city centre and bars and the actual city centre is benefiting from it as well, and the hotels, and so the whole local economy is kind of benefited rather than it being out of town new rebuild.
Do you think that the longer it goes on and we haven't got this report, that might suggest that a relocation is coming down the line?
I don't know what we can read from it, because I think both options are incredibly complicated. Like if you rebuild near St James's Park on Lees's Park, that is going to be like planning inquiry territory. Councillors, local residents, the lot. You're taking out a big slice of city park and heritage, and what does the city get in return for that? If you're rebuilding St James's, it's limited and probably really expensive to pack in more seats to that site, and there's listed buildings, as we know, on next to the East Stand. So both have huge issues.
You've also got, of course, the lease as well. The council own the lease. That probably runs for the next 70 years, maybe, but then they've got to renegotiate that. So it's a case of, do you spend a lot of money to only then have to renegotiate the lease in a generation's time? There's lots of questions going on, but we were just talking there off air about potential locations, and you do look. I think staying in the city centre would be absolutely crucial. You want those transport links in. You want, as I say, the local economy to benefit as well. But where in the city centre could you do it? You've mentioned Lees's Park there. There's a bit of whispers about the lack of funds that group have to maintain the park at the moment. So maybe that could be something that could be worked on. The Town Moor, but again, that's such a beautiful part of the city's culture. You wouldn't want to really see that being sacrificed for Newcastle United. You've got maybe the land where the current arena is, but then is the new arena ever going to get built? That's been delayed. And is that land, I think it's on a bit of a slope. So how easy is it going to be to build on that stadium, a new stadium there? There's not many options, and the options that are there, it's going to take a cleverer men than us to build a stadium.
I think so. Yeah, that site which has now been sold for housing down by the arena, and the housing grants have come through, and that would have been an iconic place to build a new stadium. And down by where the arena is, there's now sort of social housing going on there, which is a good thing. But to have a stadium there with all the bridges in the background, it would be like, the American stadiums where you're rebuilding and you leave a little gap in the stadium so you can see through to the cityscape and through to the bridges. That would have been like an incredible location. And I think if they're going to rebuild elsewhere in the city centre, the city council, the Labour group who run it, I think, and the people who are in charge of developing the city would want it like to be part of like a regeneration of quite a poor area or an underprivileged area where there'd be a huge investment. Other spin-off projects could happen. And I personally don't know where that land is coming from. You go down the Tyne, somewhere along the Tyne would be amazing, because you've got the link with the river then, but would it be close enough to the city centre? It's a huge issue, and there are problems everywhere you turn.
And that probably suggests why there's been that much of a delay, because so much work's gone into it, but there's so many questions that need to be answered, and they're very difficult ones to find.
I think if you're going to be visionary, right, and the Premier League is going to just keep going up and up and up as the league that people want to watch, and we've got Arsenal, Tottenham with iconic stadiums, Man U doing 100,000 stadium rebuild at some point. Tweaking St James's Park is not going to. I don't think tweaking St James's Park works unless they can expand the site somehow. It's not going to keep Newcastle in the next generation of mega clubs, worldwide mega clubs, and that's what they need to be. They're not. And
I guess if they were to relocate, and look, from the outset, I was very against it because there's something very special about St James's Park. But the more you look at it, the more you read, the more you talk to people, you understand how difficult this is going to be, how expensive it's going to be, and for really not that much of an expansion, you're talking 10, 12,000 seats. if the PIF decided to move, and it would have to be handled from PR wise very delicately, because we've just spoken there about the passion for the current site, but it would give them a chance to really flex their financial muscle. And you can guarantee that if they did move, it would arguably be one of the biggest and best stadium moves ever seen, especially in the Premier League, because they know what they're doing when it comes to this sort of thing, and they've got the money to back it up.
Yeah, and they're building how many stadiums in 9 or 10 in Saudi Arabia right now for the World Cup, or there will be for the 2034 World Cup. So it could all be linked up with that. But then, I think they need a mega stadium with commercial boxes that companies can buy into from the north. You don't get the same revenue as if you're in London, because London has a different pull and richer companies and company HQs. So you're not going to make as much from the corporate stuff, but you can make more. And I think big matches at Newcastle, if you make it, I think the club at the minute, from what we've done with Eels in the past year, I think they think the sweet spot for tickets is about 65,000. So they could probably sell another 15. For bigger matches, they could definitely sell more, especially if they start winning. And I think you want a size of stadium whereby you can have you can get another generation of fans in, because at the minute it's a very old generation of fans in that stadium, with loads of fans locked out and actually thousands of kids wanting to go. So if you build a bigger stadium, you might not get the return from them, but you certainly get the investment in bringing kids in with their parents and pricing it right. And then you have 80,000 Newcastle fans watching every day, and then you're a mega club, because you have those attendances. If not the revenue that Spurs and Arsenal get from charging hundreds of pounds for a seat. So I think they've got to be visionary and set Newcastle up for the next 40 or 50 years.
I guess that's the return they get, is that you get a lifelong fan who's buying shirts and falling in love with the club, because they get to see them week in, week out. It's going to be a very interesting one. If you are watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments. Would you like to stay at St James's Park? Would you like to see them move? If it means the biggest and best stadium possible. And if you're on the podcast channel, drop us an email with your thoughts as well.
It would be great to read those comments as well. I mean, it's such a not divisive debate. It's such a polarizing debate, and no one's wrong, really. Everyone's got a point, and it'll be very interesting to hear what people think.
It's a head versus heart debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because heart says stop there, the emotion that's there.
Yeah.
We've grown up watching from the terraces. You've got the memories of Sir Bobby on the touchline, or Shearer's volley against Everton, really special moments. Yeah. But the head says commercially, is it going to be cost effective to stay? And also, you've got to keep up with the importance.
Yeah. I mean, so the ideal scenario would be to build it really nearby. So I've got memories of going when I was like 7 and 8 years old, before the stadium was rebuilt, and walking around Leazes Terrace and going at the corner of the Leazes end and watching quite a lot of matches there with my dad early when I was very young. And I was thinking about that last night, thinking, well, if they just moved that and they turned it into an office block, it would be terrible, So you do have loyalties to an actual site like St James's Park, and there's tradition to it. But if they could somehow link it up with that site, and I mean, building on a park's hugely controversial as well. It's a terrible decision and dilemma place to be in, but the decision's got to be made, and then everyone's got to get behind it and do it.
Yeah, I don't envy the people who need to make that decision, and we await on that report then, and as soon as we get it, you will get to read it here on Chronicle Live, and of course the Mirror as well. Helen from Corbridge has emailed in and has a question about some of Newcastle United stars. She writes, big fan of the show, guys. My question for Simon is whether we'll see a contract on the table for Anthony Gordon or Alexander Isak. It's all good keeping them at the club this summer, but given their talents, surely a new deal is now needed.
Well, we don't know what the pay rate is now. I suspect Alexander Isak is paid quite well, since he was a £60 million recruit when they bought him. So, but they will want to keep an eye on those big stars to make sure that if Anthony Gordon is now valued as a 70-80 million pound player when they bought him for 35-40, then he'll want to be paid as a 75 million pound player and an England squad regular, and one of the main sort of top 4 stars that Newcastle have got. And I think we reported in was it when the club were in Japan, that the club were looking at a new contract for Anthony Gordon, because his deal it wasn't a long deal that he actually signed, was it? It was.
I'm not sure off the top.
I think it was 3. Was it 3.5? And it's not out of contract this year, but I think maybe a couple of years to go. So that's probably Gordon is the priority deal that they need to get sorted. So yeah, they should be looking at that. and they should, not necessarily for salary, but you see what Chelsea have done for their players and the young players they've bought. They've really stretched their deals out, sometimes to like 2033, 2034. That might be an accounting thing which helps them meet PSR rules again.
You just got to laugh at Chelsea.
You just got to laugh at Chelsea what they've done. But it is a risk for Newcastle to have Anthony Gordon on a contract to June the 30th, 2026. So, that could be stretched out. I mean, obviously, it doesn't guarantee a player is going to stay. But if you negotiate a new contract, you can put clauses in there, like release clauses, like Bruno's got on his new deal. I do think it's like the heart of the question gets to how do you keep Isaac, Gordon, Bruno, your main stars. Tonali less so because he's got to prove himself this year. And I think it's a big season for Newcastle to prove that they can get back into Europe. And I think they have got to get back into Europe or next summer. I mean, Isaac could play in probably any European team, score loads of goals, win stuff, and be in the Champions League. Gordon possibly could as well. Bruno could. Now, no one's coming in to buy them at the moment, but they will have options next summer. If Newcastle aren't in Europe and aren't achieving what we hope they can in the top six, there could be, well, I'm certain there will be a big money sale next summer if Newcastle can't get in the top six again.
Yeah, I don't think many people would argue with you. I think that's probably what you would see as well. If a new deal was put on the table, it would have a release clause in for Champions League sides. If City come in, if Arsenal come in, Real Madrid, Barcelona, you have to accept a certain amount of money. But also, I think the other part of this question, at the moment, Newcastle United are very strict with their wage structure. They've got an idea of where they want to be at. They don't want to break it. But if you have ambitions of being the very best in the Premier League, at a certain point in this project, you're going to have to smash that wage structure. You're also going to have to smash the ethos within the dressing room. Every man is part of a team. There's no I in the team. The best players have big egos. Some of them will be disruptive. That's just the sacrifice you make. When is that point coming, do you think?
Well, when they can afford it, probably. I mean, this is the difference between Newcastle being elite and not elite. Like the top four now, they've probably got stars earning. Well, Man U was said to be up to 450,000 a week with De Gea, and probably quite a lot of players for Man U, possibly Chelsea, Liverpool, certainly Salah, etc. They'll have their star men on 300 grand a week, 350 grand a week. Awful lot of money. Like Newcastle aren't even half of that at the minute. Probably the top of Newcastle, 170. Well, I mean, we're kind of guessing and getting the feel for it behind the scenes, but it went over 100. A lot of them are over 100 now. It's nowhere near what the top clubs are paying, and that's what leaves them vulnerable to people wanting new contracts or wanting to move on because they can get double the money. And it's a short playing career. You've probably got a sweet spot of 3 or 4 years as a player where you're on the up, where you can cash in and get those deals done. And you can't blame them for wanting it. Why not? Why would you not want 3 million more a year to set your family up and all your friends for life? So Newcastle can't afford to pay that at the minute because PSR rules, whatever they pay out in transfer fees or wages hits them in terms of not running a big squad or not being able to buy that next big player. So that's the problem. They've got to grow their income. It all comes back to that.
It does. One to watch there. And we've had a few questions regarding Eddie Howe's take on only wanting players who can improve the first team. And that signing no one rather than anyone is sometimes better. Essentially, Simon, all the questions we're asking, whether you agree on that take.
Well, I absolutely agree with the policy of just signing someone who can improve the first team. I think they've got enough squad players who can fit in and do very good jobs. Emil Kraft being one of them. Lloyd Kelly, not exactly fit, not totally guaranteed first team place, but he's come in on a free and slotted in. There are enough squad players there to plug gaps, but when you've got a core of 4 or 5 like really elite players who could play anywhere, you just need to add to that. And every summer you need or January you need to add to that. And I don't think there's any disharmony at the top of the club in terms of Eddie Howe says he wanted someone number one signing to be improving the first 11. We saw Paul Mitchell in Germany very briefly for a little handshake and what's going on. Nothing on the record, but I will say now he did say that we are looking for people to just improve the first 11. They're not packing the squad. So there's like Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell have the same theory on it. Whether there's a division because wasn't delivered is another thing, or whether there's been hard questions asked, and I expect there must have been hard questions asked in the last few days. So I think it's the right policy. There's no point in getting squad players in. I think they want to add from the junior ranks, and they also want to add on clever free transfers. But then when you're spending your money, you've got to get people who are going to improve. Like Elanga is still on the radar from Notts Forest. To try to get him at the end of the window, he will be like a top target again in January. Can they get Elanga? I mean, I'm sure that's probably the first question they're asking to upgrade that right wing position. And we've found over the years with this ownership group, like once the target's out, the targets don't kind of go away. They're not scouting suddenly different players into the next window. They're still keeping an eye on the same players. See, are they at the same level? Can we get a better deal? Can we get a cheaper deal? Even Gahey, he's got, like, after this year, he's got 2 years left on his contract at Palace. I think if he doesn't extend and he gets to next summer and he's got a year left in his contract, that devalues him. He's probably going to be worth 40 million then, like Ivan Toney was this year with 1 year left. So yeah, it's interesting that they needed to sign players who can improve them.
We've got Adam on X who asks, does anyone believe that Gay is better than Fabian Schär? Age difference aside, I'm not convinced there's much difference in quality, which makes our willingness to spend £70 million on him absolutely baffling.
Well, they weren't willing to spend 70 million, were they, in the end?
65
plus a bit or whatever, and then it didn't happen. So, but is he worth 70 million? That's a really, I mean, I think Crystal Palace played a blinder. They were under pressure to sell because they'd already raised money in the summer, and they played a blinder in pushing the price up, and they saw Newcastle were desperate. I think Shaw's sending off 2 weeks ago probably put the price up again. We actually joked about it on the last podcast and during the match when Shaw got sent off, but it turned out it wasn't a joke. It was probably true that his price was pushed up, and Crystal Palace had Newcastle under the thumb in the negotiations. Yeah, I think I don't think there isn't much between them. Although Shaw isn't the fastest, I think when the game's stretched, he could probably get exposed for pace. But I think Shaw on the ball and knocking passes around and picking out forward passes from the back, which is hugely important to a good team these days. He might be better than Gay on the ball. So I think Gay would have to come in and win his place. Daft though it sounds, because Shaw's not done a lot wrong in the last kind of couple of seasons.
In terms of the chase for Gay, there was various reports anyhow, shut them down, but that it was Gay or no one. But surely that couldn't have been the case, right?
I don't think that was the case. I think people have written all angles on this, and that was the case. And then the next day it was written that it wasn't the case. I think there were definitely 3 targets there, but I think the decision was taken at the top of the club to go for the one they really wanted, Gay, and they couldn't. And they thought they could get him. Presumably they knew that Gay wanted to come, and this agent said he would want to come, and there must have been like salaries discussed. So all that must have been like all smoothed. But the only thing they couldn't do was the transfer fee.
Do you think they made a mistake not walking away earlier? Because as Aaron Stokes mentioned on the Monday show earlier in the week, the Palace manager actually came out and said there was never any doubt. Now, whether he's kind of saying that just to kind of, pay favour to the Palace fans, we don't know. But there seems to be some suggestion that this deal was never as certain, maybe as certain figures in Newcastle United thought it might have been.
Yeah, I think it must have been. There must have been reason to think that they could have got him. That must have been from the player or from the player's agent or wherever that this deal was on, and that's why they've chased him. And Parish has held firm and not done it. Walking away and saying, "Let's not spend that money." I know it's not ideal, and you want new faces. New people to challenge the players at the club. They want the players thinking there's a freshness about every season because there's new characters in the dressing room. But walking away from it does suggest that they actually do have quite a lot of trust in Shaw when he comes back from suspension, and that Botman is back on the grass and running around, and they've got a lot of trust in him. So it does suggest that there's not an emergency position. It wasn't an emergency position to need, even though it was the one they wanted to do and spend 70 million on. It wasn't an emergency to do it, and they can get a better deal. And they probably are better. Newcastle aren't in a position where they can make mistakes in the transfer market. Man U have made loads of mistakes. Ten Hag has spent £660 million on Man United. Like, where are they going? if Eddie Howe had that money without making mistakes, they would win the title. So it is important not to make mistakes at this stage of the growth of the club.
But should they have moved on to other targets? We had the chap from I think it was Leipzig who's gone to Saudi now to play. We've had the chap from Leverkusen who shut down the rumour pretty as soon as it came out. But should they have moved on to these other names who we do believe they were looking at the same time, or did they do right by sticking by Gay because he was the number one target the manager wanted that Mitchell thought could improve the side?
If you think Gay is significantly better than the two other options on the table, or the other one's got a really close, which is just as high or just as difficult to get him out of the club, then you stick with Gay. I mean, it's really my gut feeling all through that week was this is all just posturing. A transfer will happen, and that's probably like from just experience of watching transfers unfold, all this bidding stuff and everyone getting like hyper about it. I genuinely did think, well, look, they're going to get him eventually.
Do you think the injury to the Palace defender was changed it?
Possibly. That's what the Palace. That's what's been said at the Palace end. But I usually when there's a deal like that on the table, it gets done. It is quite unusual that a club of Newcastle size offering an England international a route to further his career and it doesn't get done. I mean, a naughtier player, a more disruptive player than Mark Gay might have kicked off behind the scenes. I think Gay's such a good squad member and person that he hasn't had the devil in him to do that to the team that's really helped him build his career.
Not just appeal more to Eddie Howe.
Well, yeah, he wants those characters, but that character is not. Other people would have been saying, "I'm not coming to training today. Get me to Newcastle, accept the fee."
Well, Anthony Gordon, for example, we went on a little bit of a strike, didn't he? In terms of the squad, though, because we did the season preview and I said top 4, but that was based on them bringing in at least one.
All right, so you're backtracking now.
No. I mean, I still think they've got a decent squad, but is it top 4? I don't know. I think they needed at least one addition to kind of secure the squad for that top 4. Look, they continue in the fashion they've started the season, then yes, top 4 is definitely on.
Yeah.
I think they've got a decent team of maybe 8 or 9 really good players, and then you need the rest of them to come up a level, maybe to perform above their level that they can perform week in, week out, like Emil Kraft, like Jacob Murphy. We need to see them, really, really hit the highs that maybe we don't expect them to. But have they got enough to manage a run for the top 4?
I think they've got a first 11, or possibly a first 10. I mean, I'd like to see Harvey Barnes in the team and Gordon playing so that Murphy set the goal up the other day, didn't he? But I don't think it's a top 4 side. I think you need a lot of things falling for you to be a top 4 side. I think it's par for the course, 7th or 8th, top 7 or top 8. Now,
have you gone down? I'm sure you had 6, didn't you?
I think I had 6. I might have gone down and be a bit depressed after the transfer window. But if they keep Isaac fit and they improve the energy levels and the fitness and they evolve into the season and get the points on the board and then become a forceful team again, a front-footed team like Eddie Howe has had them in the past, with a little bit of extra armory in that they can sit back and soak it up, and then maybe with Tonali coming on and they can become a team where they control the ball a bit more, which is the ideal scenario when they're in this team's development, and the back 4 showed up, then there could be a top 6 team. There could be a top 6 team, but they need. I mean, if Isaac gets injured for any long period of time, then that is a massive problem.
That is one of the questions we have got: is where's Callum Wilson? Because initially we were told 1-2 games maybe, but when is he going to be back?
Well, it seems like he's had a back injury, and it looks like it's been worse than was first sort of hinted at. Eddie Howe said he had no chance to come back before the international break and just after. We don't see any evidence that he's on social media that he's stepped up his training or anything. So, like a back injury for someone in their 30s, it's not great, is it? As I know, it does hamper you if you tweak something in there. So, but he was skipping around and he has been doing fitness work, so he's not completely crocked. So you maybe think in the next month he could come back and be the backup. And one of the good things about 2 seasons ago was when Isaac was out, Callum Wilson came back in and it all dovetailed kind of perfectly. Wilson came in, scored a few goals, got injured, but then Isaac came back in. You kind of need that kind of look to finish up. But yeah, Wilson needs to get back in that side.
Yeah, William Asula as well, the other option Newcastle United have, but he was warming up on Sunday against Spurs, but obviously didn't come onto the pitch. We didn't see him, did we, in the cup game? I think he's only played once, hasn't he?
I've seen him. I think he's come on briefly. Did he come on briefly? In
the
pre-season, he scored in one of the pre-season games, but it got disallowed.
I don't think we've seen him since, have we?
I've been to the 2 home games, so I don't know about the away game. I don't think he played at Bournemouth. No. So I mean, I think he's the kind of player you're going to really nurse into it and put on if you're winning 3-0 and give him 20 minutes at the end. If you're confident the game is wrapped up, you might put him on. Yeah.
We've got Baba Yaga on X asking, has Howe abandoned the high press entirely? I understood last season with the injuries, but it's really not clear what our intended style of play is anymore. And there were a couple of questions like that in the post-match Spurs press conference, and you've briefly mentioned it earlier in the show, but just answer Baba's question there.
Well, I wouldn't have thought so, but I think when you get his first choice centre-backs back where you can trust them, like Spurs did the other day, to be the 2 at the back, holding because they've got enough pace to cope with breaks, and then when they get the balance of the team right, as not so they're not being so defensive and try to shore it up so much, then I think he would want to be a front-footed team. I think they need to be a front-footed team when they're playing the bottom half of the league to finish those teams off. I think when you're playing like kind of Man City in the cup last year, they were really sitting back and trying a different way of winning. And Pep Guardiola said to Eddie Howe at the end, "Your teams don't usually play like that." He was surprised. So I think Howe is tweaking it, and he is trying to make them have different qualities in their armory, rather than just coming out 4-3-3 and be battering teams. I think they'll try and do that for 15-20 minutes at the start of a game to get on the front foot, and then there'll be other ways of playing as well. So I don't think they've abandoned it at all. I think it's the modern way to play. I think everyone's trying to play like that, but you need the fitness and your best players at the top of their game to be able to forcefully do that against the opposition in the Premier League these days.
Nothing wrong with a bit of flexibility either, depending on who you play. We've got a question in from a Toon fan in the US, in Colorado, called Joe, who asks, why don't clubs start working on signing players in January now? What's stopping Newcastle from putting in an offer for someone and having it done and dusted as soon as the window opens?
Well, they do work on transfers right now. I'm sure they'll be having meetings during the international break where they'll review what they did in the summer, and they'll say they'll be saying right now, this week probably or early next week, these are our priorities for January. What are the state of those potential deals? What can we get them for? Who are our top targets? And like I said before, probably Elanga on the right wing is the one they want. If will Forest sell, we don't know. They'll probably be holding that for more than 50 million. Can Newcastle get a? I mean, the whole. As he's saying, like you said at the end of the question there, why can't they put an offer in now and have it sorted? Well, I mean, that's not how business works. You're not going to agree a deal for a house in 6 months and then see what you don't know what's going to happen to that player in the months till January. So you can't do that. You can line everything else up. You can know what they're on, what the agent reckons they should be on if they do the transfer, in terms of contracts, etc. You can set all that up, and I'm sure they are. And they're reviewing who they can get.
Is there pressure on Paul Mitchell to get January right? I mean, it's a horrible window to have pressure on you if there is such a thing on him. But I mean, next summer is going to be a massive summer because you have lots of players out of contracts, so their features need sorting. And then, as you've mentioned, if Newcastle aren't in Europe, that's an extra headache for some of the stars who might knock on the door and say, "I want to go." But even before that, you have that January window.
Yeah.
Is the pressure on him to get it right?
Well, there certainly is from the fans, because there's been a lot of moaning from the fans on social media and in pubs and stuff where you talk to, that he hasn't delivered. But I mean, to be fair to him, he has only been here 2 months, so there was a massive reset when he came and a review of what the targets were, and then a redirection of the strategy or a continuation of certain strategies. I think so. There is pressure on him in January, but I think that we haven't touched on this, that Newcastle's strategy for the summer was kind of derailed by not getting Tosin Bayaro from Fulham on a free. He chose to go to Chelsea for bigger wages. Don't think he's playing. Silly decision. We said that in one of the other pods. That was a poor career decision from him. not to come to Newcastle and be in the team. So they thought they could have got him on a free, therefore freeing the money up for the right wing. Now, when they couldn't get him on a free, they suddenly had to redirect money to a different position and then leave right wing to kind of, just be like the secondary target position. So that's what derailed the whole strategy. That's why there was problems, because that happened in June. So what were we talking about?
We talk about pressure on Mitchell.
Pressure on Mitchell. Yeah, there is a massive pressure on him. I mean, one of the pictures of the weekend was Yasser Al-Rumayyan flying in, big Saudi chief in charge of all the money, wondering where the new signings were, and him sitting between Eales and Mitchell, and the tension that there looked to be in the box. There wasn't a lot of small talk going on, I don't think, and it looked a bit tense, and I'm sure there were pretty difficult questions asked in the boardroom on Sunday by Al-Rumayyan, and wanted to know what the hell was going on. So yeah, I think he is under pressure, and you know what? The less pressure he's put under, really, from us and from fans, in terms of when he's negotiating, probably the better, because other sporting directors will know that he's under pressure to deliver a deal, and they might be screwing the price up again even more, just like Palace did. So the more Newcastle is seen to be under pressure, the worse the January window is going to be. And I think you can expect some friendly leaks that Newcastle are ready to go in January, ready to go with nothing. We're not going to spend anything. We're not desperate. They'll be trying to put all those messages out, not for Newcastle fans, but probably for other clubs who will be looking to
push the price
hike
up.
The price.
Yes. It's going to be an interesting January transfer window, but of course plenty of football to come before then. Just to finish off then Simon, obviously we'll be back next week with a show, and then we've obviously got the Wolves coming up, and we'll have the League Cup as well. September's an interesting month. You've got 2 away games, you've got the cup game, and then you've got City.
3 away games in a row.
How do you see September going?
Well, I mean, my predictions are absolutely useless. I thought it was going to be a tough start of the season, but they have got points on the board. Wolves, I mean, no team, Liverpool hit their stride on Sunday, but no team is really hitting their stride. Man City are probably, but none of the ones in the middle group who Newcastle are about to play are like surprising or become, or better than we thought they would be, or ripping up trees. So, I mean, they probably want to go to the Wolves and win. Or you go to Wolves and don't lose, and that's a decent result. You want to get everyone.
I'm sure they've drawn there like the last 5, haven't they?
Yeah, it's been like 1-1 several times.
2-2 last season. 1-1. St Maximin scored a volley season before. Then you had the game before the takeover, which was 1-1. Jacob Murphy.
Yeah, real low point for everybody in the fans.
Maybe a point there if history serves you well. Right. But then you got Fulham, who they look like they've done some really good business, but it just hasn't quite clicked yet.
Yeah. Well, you don't want it to click against Newcastle.
No, you don't.
So, Newcastle seem to be quite, the Fulham FA Cup game last year was good, and they came through that. So, I mean, away game, how do you predict away games? I don't know. They're really difficult to predict. If you get 4 points out of those 2 away games, then that's like
I guess fantastic. The other question on that is do you expect the performances to improve? Is it fair to expect them to improve as soon as they go against Wolves, or you're more looking to maybe, I don't know, the second game in October, maybe before we really see Newcastle in full flow?
Well, House said they were going to do a load of work on fitness and sharpening people up in the next 2 weeks before the Wolves game, and then there's obviously the cup game as well. So I think they'll be better. I think they'll get better because there's players away on international duty, but they've got Shaw coming back at some soon, and as long as they can get Isak back and maybe Harvey Barnes, Anthony Gordon. I think Newcastle need to see Anthony Gordon. He's had such a long season. He almost had like a 15-month long season because of the under-21 Euros and the senior Euros plus playing for Newcastle. So he probably needs like a bit of a week off and then some sharpening work to get him going. So if they can get everyone clicking like that, I think the way Newcastle are playing now, teams might be expecting to have a bit more of the ball against Newcastle and be a bit more confident. And I think Newcastle can evolve themselves to kind of tweak their formation and shock teams a little bit. Because if teams think they're going to be able to attack Newcastle, then Newcastle are going to be able to exploit counterattacks and hitting people on the break, like seems to be their strength at the moment. So if the performances have lulled people into rivals into a false sense of security, then could be quite good for Newcastle on the break.
Certainly could. And Cher will be back for that Wolves game because the cup game against Forest counted. So some good news there. But will he be able to unseat Emil Kraft's the big question?
That is a question. I think he will. I mean, Kraft can play in the cup game, I think, and then maybe Shaw can play in the 2 league games. So, and he's retired from international duty, so Shaw will be around and training. So that's a good fresh point for Newcastle as well. So I think he makes the change and brings Shaw back. And I want to see it persevered with Harvey Barnes on the left and Anthony Gordon on the right, because I think that's the strongest front three. Because Barnes is going to score goals this year, and he showed with that finish the other day. He's going to be a good goal scorer unexpectedly.
Yeah, certainly. So, well, Simon, thank you very much for popping on for the first episode of the Bird's Eye View. Me and Simon will be back next Wednesday. In the meantime, head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news. Give this video a thumbs up on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Leave us a rating and review on the podcast channel. It's much appreciated. And for myself and Simon, we'll see you guys next week.